educational reform is heating up national debate. At the centre of debate lies the Gonski Review. What is the Gonski Review and what makes it so controversial?
The Gonski Review was published by David Gonski, the Chancellor of the University of New South Wales. In the review, he suggests implementing a new funding system for educational efficiency. Following Gonski's recommendations, the federal government has initiated educational reforms under the new Better Schools plan. This plan will focus on 5 reform areas: quality learning, teaching, school empowerment, meeting student needs, and a transparent funding system.
Current funding is based on sectors, funding the Catholic, independent and government sector. But under Gonski, we're going to see a funding of individual needs. So the central idea of Gonski is that a minimum sum of money should be spent on each student, which equates to a quality education.
Over the next 6 years, nearly $15 billion will be spent on both primary and secondary schools in order to improve students' academic results as well as school resources.
Interactive whiteboards is such an incredibly useful learning tool, teaching and learning tool for the kids. Just take to all the technology so well. And we've had to raise funds to get those, as opposed to the department providing funding to the schools for that sort of thing. And I think it'd be good if that could be provided.
New South Wales Teachers Federation President Maury Mulheron stresses the need for extra funding for students experiencing disadvantages.
There are many students who come from a very poor, impoverished background, economic disadvantage, students from a non-English speaking background, students from an Indigenous background living in Indigenous communities. We know all those types of students require additional resources because of where the school's located, or the very fact that there is often a cultural deficit or experience in those children's lives that need to be redressed through additional resources.
The government is waiting for all states and territories to sign up to the reforms, but things aren't going as smoothly as planned. Budget allocation over the Gonski Review is drawing strong opposition from groups from the tertiary education sector. More than $2 billion of tertiary education funding will impose a financial burden on university students. Consequently, students will have fewer start-up scholarship opportunities. They might even lose the discount for upfront payment of HECS loans. It could discourage them from continuing their tertiary education.
Taking away from tertiary education is crippling the nation. I mean, you can't look at education as a commodity. You have to look at it as a necessity. Like, for people who have less, it affects them more. And that's like me. I'm in a situation where I'm living out of home and I'm studying, and I have to go to part-time because I have to do more work.
A lot of the scholarships that exist now, particularly for Indigenous students, are going to be turned into grants. So rather than getting sort of the $1,000 scholarship each semester, it's being turned into a grant, so it's essentially something that you have to pay back.
Since March, university staff and students have participated in industrial action against funding cuts.
We have been fighting for the university, for students, for good conditions, which mean that we are able to conduct research and teaching and student support in a proper way.
The Greens and the Coalition say they could build on the government's plans to adopt the Gonski reforms.
Labor's education credentials are in tatters going into the 2013 election as they're cutting $4.7 billion from education, including universities, childcare, apprenticeships and training. They're also cutting $325 million from school education over the next 4 years. This is because Labor has racked up a record debt of $254 billion and the 5 biggest deficits in Australia's history.
That yes, we will support Labor's recommendations for increasing funding to our schools, particularly our public schools, and we're putting in an additional $2 billion. When it comes to higher education, our plan is that we won't support the Labor's $2.3 billion cuts to pay for Gonski. There's no reason to do that, and we're advocating that there's an additional $1.5 billion that goes in over 4 years to increase base funding.
The government has insisted that its Better Schools plan, which came out as a result of the Gonski Review, will be beneficial for Australia's future. However, the cuts to tertiary education don't seem like a long-term solution. What is your opinion on this? And do the cuts affect you? Join us for the conversation on our Facebook or Twitter.